let's face it, we all kind of get that knot in our stomach, don't we? When we hear about, the national debt always going up, or trade deficits, or worries about Social Security down the
Oh,
line.
absolutely. Yeah.
These big economic things, they can feel pretty heavy, like a weight on us now, and maybe for the future, too.
They really can. And these anxieties, they dominate so much of the economic news. It's understandable. People want stability.
Exactly. And that's where we're headed today. We're going to dig into these complex sounding areas,
Mm.
but we're doing it through a really interesting lens, I think. Surprisingly clear, actually. It's based on the work of economist Warren Mosler.
Ah, Mosler. Yeah.
You might have heard the name. CNBC called him one of the brightest minds in finance, and people like James Galbraith have praised him too. Says he's really original, very clear.
He definitely has a unique way of looking at our money system.
Mm,
It can really shift your perspective. He cuts through a lot of the usual stuff.
right. Points to things that are often kind of overlooked.
Yeah, fundamental things.
Yeah, fundamental things. Precisely. So, our goal here in this deep dive is to unpack what Mosler calls the seven deadly innocent frauds of economic policy.
Okay. 7 frauds.
Yeah, seven widely held beliefs about the economy, especially government finances, that Mosler says are just, well, wrong, at least for a country like the US with its own currency.
A non-convertible currency, specifically.
Right, meaning the dollar isn't tied to gold or anything fixed, gives the government flexibility. So we're aiming for those aha moments, without getting lost in jargon.
Sounds good. Let's jump in.
Okay, let's unpack the first one.
So, fraud number 1. Yeah. Mosler says it's this very common idea that government finance is just like household finance.
Right.
The government has to get money through taxes or borrowing before it can spend.
We hear that constantly. The government's overspending, they'll run out of money, just like a family would. But Mosler says that's just not how it works.
Fundamentally misunderstanding it, according to him. His main point is that the government, because it creates the currency,
US dollar, yeah.
it doesn't need to get dollars before spending them. Think about paying taxes with a check. What actually happens?
Well, I write the check, they cash it, the money leaves my account.
Exactly. The number in your account goes down. Did the government physically get something tangible it's going to reuse? Not really.
Hmm.
So the core insight, and this is key, the government actually spends first, then taxes can be paid. It flips the whole thing around.
Okay, spends first. That's counterintuitive. It's more like adjusting numbers in account.
Pretty much digital balances. What about cash? If you pay your taxes in actual dollar bills.
Yeah, surely they take that cash and use it for something.
Well, interestingly, Mosler points out that if you paid federal taxes with physical cash, it would likely be, counted, recorded,
Mm-hmm.
and then shredded.
For shredded.
Destroyed, yeah. It's not being put in a vault to pay for roads later. Let that
Oh.
sink in.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty wild. So if they're not really getting money to spend, how does the government actually do the spending?
It does the reverse of taxing. It just increases numbers in bank accounts.
Hmm.
You know, Ben Bernanke, former Fed chair, actually said something similar on 60 Minutes.
Oh, yeah.
He said when the Fed lends to a bank, they simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account. Government spending is basically data entry on its own big spreadsheet, the dollar system.
Okay. To really wrap our heads around this spending first idea, Mosler uses that analogy, right? The parent-child coupons.
Exactly. That's a great one. Imagine parents issue their own coupons, maybe for doing chores.
Okay.
But then the parents also say, you owe us 5 coupons a week in tax.
Uh-huh.
Where do the kids get the coupons to pay the tax?
They have to earn them from the parents first by doing the chore.
Precisely. The issuer, the parents, has to spend the coupons into existence before the tax can be paid with those coupons.
It's like a brand new country trying to collect property tax before it's even issued any money. How could anyone pay?
Impossible, right?
Yeah.
The government has to spend its currency out into the economy first.
So people have the currency to pay taxes with.
Yeah, and that's totally different from us. As individuals or states or businesses, we do need to get dollars first, somehow earn them, borrow them before we spend.
Okay, fraud number 1. Definitely feeling less innocent now. Let's move to fraud number 2. This is a big one. The idea that government deficits today mean our kids and grandkids are going to be stuck paying it all back.
Yeah, that's a huge source of anxiety for people. That image of future generations crushed under this massive debt. It's powerful.
Very concerning.
And Mosler tackles this head on. He tells this story about talking with former Senator Lowell Weicker on a boat dock.
Oh, yeah.
And Weicker apparently expressed that exact worry, the debt burden on the next generation.
So what was Mosler's response? How does he see it?
His key point is, look, the stuff we produce today, the cars, the food, the healthcare it's consumed by us, living today.
Right. Makes sense.
The economic output of the future. That'll be determined by the people living then. Their skills, their tech, the resources they have. It's got nothing to do with government deficits from decades earlier.
You can't, like, physically send a 2024 car forward in time to 2054 to pay off some old debt.
Exactly. It doesn't work that way. Mosler argues the real cost, the real burden on future generations is if we don't use our full potential today because we're scared of these deficits. That's lost output, lost progress.
Okay, thinking in terms of real stuff, real output, that helps clarify it. So what is this government debt then that everyone talks about? What are Treasury securities?
Good question. A U.S. Treasury security, which is most of the debt, is basically just a savings account at the Federal Reserve.
Like a savings bond.
Sort of, yeah. When someone buys a Treasury, they're essentially moving dollars from their checking account at the Fed to a savings account at the Fed. They get those dollars back later, plus interest.
Okay, so what about China buying our debt? That sounds like they own us or something.
That phrase is misleading. When China or anyone buys our debt, what's happening on the Fed's books is just numbers moving. They shift dollars from their reserve account, their checking account, to their securities account, their savings account. It's all happening within the Fed system.
So paying off China isn't like sending them shiploads of gold.
Nope. It's just another accounting entry at the Fed moving the numbers back. It's not about shipping physical assets.
So the real worry for the future isn't this giant bill they have to pay back?
The real worry, Mosler argues, is the lost potential now. If we hold back on useful spending on infrastructure, education, research because of this debt fear, that's what hurts the future. We're leaving productive capacity on the table.
That's a really important distinction. Okay, fraud number 3. Government deficits take away private savings. This one feels wrong somehow.
It does feel wrong, right? Because we think, well, if the government's borrowing so much, there must be less money left for everyone else to save or invest.
Yeah, like it's soaking up all the available funds.
But Mosler argues the exact opposite. He says government deficit spending actually adds to the net financial assets, the savings of the non-government sector. That includes us, businesses, and even foreigners.
Adds to savings. How does that work?
Think about the flows. Government spending injects dollars into the economy. That's a credit to someone's bank account.
Okay.
Government taxes remove dollars. That's a debit from someone's account.
Right.
So if the government spends more than it taxes running a deficit, it means there are more dollars being put into the non-government sector than are being taken out.
Ah, so the net result is more financial assets, more savings for the rest of us.
Exactly. The government's deficit, dollar for dollar, equals the non-government sector's financial surplus. It's an accounting identity.
So wait, if the government runs a surplus, it spends less than it taxes. That actually reduces our net savings.
That's his point.
Yeah.
He apparently had debates with former Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin about this. Rubin thought surpluses added to savings.
The conventional view.
Right. But Mosler argued, no, a surplus means the government is draining more dollars out of the private sector than it's putting in. People have to sell assets, like treasuries, back to the government, or draw down savings to pay those taxes.
Huh. Is there evidence for this?
Well, he points to the 2009 recession. Big jump in the government deficit then, right?
Yeah, huge stimulus.
And what happened to the private savings rate? It actually went up significantly during that period. That fits his model.
Wow, okay. That really flips the script. Now, let's hit fraud number 4. Social Security. The constant worry that it's broken, going bankrupt, won't be there for us.
A very potent fear. We hear nonstop about the trust fund running out of money.
But based on what we've discussed, the government can't run out of its own currency.
Exactly. As the issuer of the dollar, the federal government doesn't operationally run out of dollars.
Right.
Government checks don't bounce unless Congress decides they should, Social Security payments included.
So making those payments is just more data entry, like we talked about before.
Pretty much. When your Social Security payment is due, the government credits your bank account. For its own internal accounting, it debits the Social Security Trust Fund account.
So the trust fund isn't like a literal piggy bank they need to keep full.
Not in the way we think of a household saving money. It's more of a record-keeping device, tracking contributions and payments over time. It doesn't physically constrain the government's ability to make the payments promised by law.
Okay, that completely reframes the debate about privatizing Social Security then, doesn't it? You mentioned Mosler talked to Steve Moore from Cato about this.
Yeah, he uses that conversation to illustrate a point. The privatization argument often implies individuals could get better returns investing privately.
Right.
But Mosler points out the current system is functionally like buying a government promise: you give dollars now, you get dollars back later. Privatization mainly changes who holds the financial claim: you hold stocks and bonds in a private account versus the trust fund holding treasury bonds.
So it doesn't fundamentally change the nation's overall ability to support retirees.
Not in terms of the financial mechanics, no. The real issue with Social Security, Mosler would argue, isn't whether the checks can be paid. It's about social choices. What level of benefits do we want retirees to have? And crucially, what real resources, food, housing, healthcare, energy, will be available in the future for everyone, including seniors, to consume?
It's about the real economy, not just the accounting.
Exactly. Can we produce enough goods and services for everyone? That's the real question. The payment system is just how we distribute the claims on that production.
Okay, let's shift to the global view. Fraud number 5. The idea that the U.S. trade deficit is inherently bad costs us jobs and puts us in debt to other countries, another news staple.
Oh, absolutely. Constantly debated. But again, Mosler flips the perspective. He says, wait a minute, imports are a real benefit. Exports are a real cost.
Imports are good, exports are bad. That sounds totally backwards. Break that down.
Think about what makes a nation wealthy in real terms. It's the stuff as people get to use and consume, right?
Yeah, goods and services.
So when we import more stuff than we export, run a trade deficit, we are, in real terms, getting more goods and services from the rest of the world than we're sending out. We're consuming more.
So the deficit means we're getting more stuff.
In real terms, yes. He uses this analogy. Imagine after World War II, if General MacArthur had demanded Japan send the U.S. millions of cars every year for free.
We'd probably call that exploitation or reparations, maybe.
Right. But when other countries voluntarily send us more goods than we send them, resulting in a trade deficit, we worry about it as if it's a terrible burden. It's kind of paradoxical.
So when China runs a trade surplus with us, they're the ones sending us real goods. And what are they getting back?
They're getting U.S. dollar financial assets. They're choosing to save in dollars, essentially, accumulating claims in our currency.
And what about the jobs argument that imports kill domestic jobs?
Mosler argues the U.S. can always achieve full employment if it wants to, using domestic policy, fiscal policy, government spending, tax adjustments.
Regardless of imports.
Regardless of the trade balance, yeah. He'd say, if people lose jobs due to imports, the problem isn't the import itself, it's the lack of sufficient overall demand or spending in the U.S. economy to create other jobs for those people.
So we shouldn't blame the imports, but maybe insufficient government support or spending?
That's the implication. And the idea that we're indebted to foreigners kind of dismisses that too. When foreigners hold dollars or treasuries, they're holding claims denominated in our currency within our financial system.
Like they're playing in our sandbox, by our rules.
Sort of, yeah. We aren't dependent on their capital in the way people often think. They choose to hold our IOUs.
Okay. Moving on. Fraud number 6. We need savings before we can have investment. So government borrowing crowds out private investment because it uses up the savings.
Right, that classic idea. Got to save up money first, then you can build the factory or buy the machine.
Seems logical for a person or a company.
It does. But Mosler points out, in the modern banking system, it often works the other way around. Loans actually create deposits.
Loans create deposits. How?
When a bank approves a loan for, say, a business investment, it doesn't typically lend out existing savings. It just credits the borrower's account. Poof! New deposit created. That loan is the funding for the investment.
So the investment spending itself generates the money needed for it through the banking system.
In large part, yes. Savings, in this view, are often the result of investment spending, not the prerequisite for it. Income gets generated, and some of that gets saved.
This sounds like that old paradox of thrift idea from economics.
Exactly. If everyone tries to save more simultaneously by cutting spending, overall income can fall, and businesses might invest less because demand is weak. It can be self-defeating.
So government deficits, by injecting spending, can actually support investment in that context.
Precisely. If the private sector is trying to save more than it wants to invest, government deficit spending can fill that gap, maintain demand, and prevent the economy from slowing down unnecessarily. It offsets that private desire to net save.
Okay, almost there. Fraud number 7. Higher deficits today must mean higher taxes tomorrow, and that's always bad news.
Yeah, the "we'll have to pay for it eventually" argument, usually framed as a negative.
How does Mosler reframe this?
He doesn't necessarily disagree that higher deficits might lead to higher taxes later, but the why and the is it bad parts are different.
Okay.
He argues taxes aren't primarily needed to get the government money to spend. We already established that. Instead, taxes are a tool to manage the economy, specifically to regulate aggregate demand, total spending power.
To cool things down if they get too hot.
Exactly. So higher deficits today, especially if they help get us out of a recession and towards full employment, well, they might lead to a situation tomorrow where the economy is booming, resources are fully used, and inflation becomes a risk.
Right.
Then higher taxes might be the appropriate policy tool, not to pay back the old deficit in some literal sense, but to reduce overall spending power just enough to keep inflation in check without causing unemployment.
So higher taxes could be a sign of success in reaching full employment and a tool to manage that success.
That's the perspective. It's about maintaining balance in the economy, using taxes to adjust demand as needed, rather than viewing taxes solely as the government needing to get its money back.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to take in. It really challenges so many things we just assume about the economy. So if you had to boil down Mosler's core message from all this.
I think the absolute core message is that so many of our big economic fears about government debt, deficits, trade, Social Security, they stem from using the wrong analogy. We think the government is like a household, but for a country that issues its own fiat currency like the U.S.,
Mm.
the rules are fundamentally different.
And the big takeaway for anyone listening is probably that the US government operationally cannot go broke in its own currency. It can't run out of dollars.
Right. The real constraints aren't the dollars themselves. They're things like inflation. If spending outpaces the economy's ability to produce goods and services and the actual availability of real resources,
Yeah.
workers, materials, factories, energy.
It's about managing the real economy, not just balancing a checkbook that doesn't really exist in the same way ours does.
Exactly. It's shifting focus from the financial accounting to the real productive capacity and resource allocation.
So when we hear politicians or news reports talking about these issues, what should we be asking? What should we be listening for?
Maybe question the underlying assumptions. Are they using that household analogy? Where do they think the money actually comes from? Are they talking about financial constraints or real resource constraints?
Mm.
Focusing on, what can we actually do with our people and resources rather than just the deficit number itself?
Right. Think about the mechanics.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a final thought maybe to chew on. If Mosler is right, if these widely believed innocent frauds are actually holding us back, preventing us from maybe investing more or ensuring better security for people, what possibilities open up if we understand how the system actually works?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Hmm.
It could potentially lead to very different policy choices. Maybe a more proactive approach to tackling big challenges, maybe even a more optimistic view of what's actually possible economically.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for breaking all that down with us today.
My pleasure. It's fascinating stuff.